Okay, I think it's about time. Welcome, everybody. Today's webinar. My name is Joe Simonetti. I am the Director of Education for the Firearm Injury Prevention Initiative at the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus, where our mission at the Firearm Injury Prevention Initiative is to use collaboration, education, and research to prevent all types of firearm-related injuries and deaths in our homes and our communities. As a prelude and just overarching comment about today's presentation, the Firearm Injury Prevention Initiative does not support or oppose specific legislation or make policy recommendations. Rather, the goal of our policy implementation research is to provide objective evaluation and data about how the policies that have passed in Colorado and elsewhere are being implemented and used. The title of today's talk is Implementing Safe Storage and Extreme Risk Protection Order Laws in Colorado. We're presenting this today as part of our National Firearm Injury Prevention Initiative webinar series. I have three fantastic presenters here today, which I'll speak briefly about, and then I will pass the presentation over to them. First of all, Dr. Claire McNellan is an assistant professor in the Department of Health Systems Management and Policy in the Colorado School of Public Health at CU Anschutz. Her research primarily focuses on child and family serving systems, state responses to child maltreatment, and the role of social policy in promoting maternal and child health and safety. Dr. Leslie Barnard received her Doctor of Public Health from and is currently an assistant professor at the Colorado School of Public Health. As an affiliate of the Firearm Injury Prevention Initiative and the Injury and Violence Prevention Center, her work focuses on understanding the risk and protective factors that contribute to and prevent firearm-related harms and suicide prevention. Dr. Barnard has been evaluating the implementation and impact of Colorado's Extreme Risk Protection Order law since its passage in 2020. Beyond her work on extreme risk protection orders, Dr. Barnard's broader suicide prevention research includes public health strategies aimed at reducing access to lethal methods and supporting individuals with elevated risk. Lastly, Dr. Erin Kelly is the Director of Practices within the Firearm Injury Prevention Initiative and research faculty with the Injury and Violence Prevention Center at the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus. She specializes in research and practice to prevent fire-related harms, suicide, and community violence. Dr. Kelly uses community engaged and mixed method approaches in her research and has extensive experience in translating, disseminating, and supporting the implementation of evidence-based strategies, programs, and policies into practice environments. With that in mind, I want to welcome everybody who's in attendance. I want to welcome our presenters and thank you all for being here. Our goal is to present for approximately 40 or so minutes, and then we will follow up with a Q&A session at the end of it. During the webinar, you should be able to access the Q&A question box, and you can post questions in there as we go. With that, I'm going to stop talking. Dr. Kelly, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Simonetti. Dr. Simonetti mentioned this, but we are all associated with the University of Colorado Firearm Injury Prevention Initiative, or FIPI, where our vision is to create a future without any firearm-related injuries or deaths in the United States. We do this by recognizing a common goal of health and security, respecting diversity and consideration of a range of views, and engaging impacted communities and those with lived experience. The purpose of the webinar today is to provide ongoing data on the implementation of Colorado's laws that aim to protect individuals and communities from firearm-related harms. We'll specifically look at Colorado's awareness and perceptions of these laws. And we wanted to frame the conversation today by noting that we're doing this because we want to make sure that we understand how laws are being implemented so that we can learn from and improve implementation efforts. And we also believe that this allows us to identify opportunities for education in the future. I wanted to start by giving a few acknowledgements. While there are three presenters on the call today who've done a lot of work in this area, we also have multiple team members who've been involved in looking through different data sets that I'll talk a little bit about, helping us to summarize, create beautiful visuals that provide an overview of everything that we've found in the past 3 to 5 years of implementation of many of these laws. And we also want to acknowledge 2 different funding sources for this work, one of which is the Colorado Office of Gun Violence Prevention, and one is Fund for a Safer Future. We'll be discussing actually 3 different laws today, 4 in total. There are 2 laws within safe storage laws in Colorado that we'll specifically go over findings regarding. One is the safe storage of firearms, which is specific to household secure storage. And the second is secure firearm storage in vehicles that was passed just earlier this year. We'll also talk about extreme risk protection orders, which became effective in 2020. And then we'll spend just a little time at the end noting one that we'll be talking about more in the future, which is the lost or stolen firearms law, which was effective in 2021. Across all of the laws that we'll be discussing in terms of implementation today, there are actually two primary data sources that we'll be using to provide any kind of findings on implementation. The first of which is that we actually look at abstracted information from court records in Colorado. And we do this in kind of two similar but varied ways with the different laws. So first, we request case numbers and counts from the Colorado Judicial Branch, and we do this by establishing a data sharing agreement with the state and then with different counties. For extreme risk protection orders specifically, they actually then are able to provide us with case records, and then we go through and individually download each of those through a statewide online management system. We're able to do this largely because those are civil cases. With the other laws which involve criminal cases, we actually have to go back and we're provided only from the state with case numbers from the state, which we actually have to ask the Denver courts separately for those. And then we go back to the originating county court of any of those case numbers and then request any of those case records individually from the county in those circumstances. For all of that information, that very large team of people who've worked very diligently on this have then used a standardized data collection system where we defined what we wanted them to look for in those records up front. And then they abstract all of that information and include it in this database, which allows us to summarize the kind of common themes that we'll be reporting on today across all of those. The second data source that gets more at awareness and perceptions of these laws in Colorado is called the Colorado Firearm Injury Prevention Survey, or COFIPS. It is actually an annual survey, but in odd years, we regularly send a representative survey of kind of basic core questions around perspectives and opinions and awareness about different policies, but prevention strategies broadly, including secure storage within homes for those who have access to firearms. We send that to a representative survey of Colorado adults that are 18 or older. And if you have more questions about how we administer COFIPS or how it has become a representative survey, there is a website for that at cofips.org. Given that, I wanted to do the basic overview. I'll hand the reins over to Dr. Claire McMillan, who will be talking about Colorado's safe storage law.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm going to be talking today about two safe storage laws. The first is the Safe Storage of Firearms law, which became effective on July 1st of 2021. And this requires firearm owners to securely store firearms using a locking device, gun safe, or gun cabinet. And the purpose for that storage is to prevent unauthorized access by children or those prohibited from possessing firearms under state or federal laws. So the focus here is on preventing unauthorized access by children, which means that this law functions as Colorado's Child Access Prevention Law, or CAP law. Some states have kind of a more specific CAP law, but our state also includes those prohibited from possessing firearms under state or federal laws. Violations of this law result in criminal charges, and the intent is to protect children and youth, because research shows that CAP laws are associated with fewer youth suicides, accidental shootings, and homicides and assaults involving firearms. The second law that I'm going to talk briefly about, we have a little bit less information about this law at this time just because of how recently it went into effect, but it went into effect on January 1st of this year, and it's called the Secure Firearm Storage in a Vehicle law. It prohibits people from leaving firearms in unattended vehicles unless those firearms are stored in a locked container, placed out of view, and that the vehicle itself is locked. Violations of this law result in civil charges, and the intent is to reduce theft of firearms, because stolen firearms are often trafficked and later used in violent crimes, which we know the data tells us is disproportionately impacting Black and Latino youth. Again, this is a fairly recent law, so we have a little less information today about it. So on the COFIPS survey that Aaron already mentioned, we asked Colorado adults about whether they were aware of these laws. And just to be clear, these laws were already in effect when we asked them whether they were on the books or not. So ideally, the answer to both of these questions would be 100% yes across the board because everyone would know about them. And as you see here, although many Coloradans correctly know that secure storage laws do exist in Colorado, over a third of firearm owners and over half of non-firearm owners either didn't know or inaccurately believed that we did not have these laws on the books. So I also wanted to note that the way that we phrased this question on the left was specifically about access by unsupervised children, just because that's where the evidence base is strongest right now. So we wanted to see if Colorado adults recognized that we had a law that was directed at that sort of population. But together, the findings from both of these questions tell us that more education is needed in Colorado to ensure that both firearm owners and non-firearm owners are aware of the laws that are on the books and can accurately, answer this question that yes, we do have these laws. Then in terms of the implementation of the laws, this is where those court records come into play. So we requested all court records related to both the safe storage of firearms law and the safe storage in a vehicle law. And there were 118 cases related to the safe storage law between April 2021 and December of 2024. And as you can see, there's 0 related to safe storage in a vehicle as of June 2025, because the law only went into effect on January 1st. So stay tuned. We will continue to update this count annually and present more findings at future webinars. But I'm going to focus today on what we found out about the cases related to the safe storage laws, those 118. So while 118 cases were filed in Colorado during the time period, we were only able to obtain court records for 102. So the findings I'm presenting here represent those 102, which is, I think, about 88%, if I'm not mistaken, of the total. So charges for violating the safe storage law often occurred alongside other charges, as you can see on the plot on the left. 44%, like nearly half, were involved with other weapons charges, and 2 in 5 violations occurred when there was also an additional charge of child abuse in the home. And then a meaningful but fewer amount were related to charges that came alongside drug-related charges or domestic violence charges. So these are not mutually exclusive categories. That's why these numbers wouldn't add to 100. They could have all of these or just 1 or 2. And then the same goes for the plot on the right. These are not mutually exclusive categories. This plot on the right shows that the cases involve the following groups who were accessing the firearms. So about half of records showed that it was a child who was had access to the gun or firearm. And then I will note that there's a big caveat here that about half of records, it was unknown whether it was a child or an unauthorized person who had access to the firearm. So there's definitely a gap in our knowledge here based on what was recorded in the case files, but you can see that, again, this is not mutually exclusive. So in some cases, a child and a prohibited user were both involved in a case. I guess one last thing I will say about that is just that together, I think these findings are demonstrating that many of these charges involve children. We see that in both the plot on the left and the plot on the right, and or in high-risk households where child abuse might have been occurring. So I think this demonstrates the potential benefit of the law in protecting children, which is the intent of the law. And further research is warranted to continue to examine how this is being, how these laws are being implemented. So secure storage laws are designed to prevent unauthorized access to firearms, and this is in homes, specifically in homes by children, but also unauthorized users, and in vehicles where they could potentially be stolen. The aim is to reduce accidental shootings, suicides, and violent crime. And for Coloradans, this means that we promote and normalize secure storage as part of reasonable and responsible firearm ownership. And firearm trade organizations recommend that firearms be locked and unloaded with ammunition stored separately. In Colorado, the law does allow individual discretion, though, in how you're going to securely store your firearms. It's just the ultimate impact of making sure that they are not accessible by a child or an unauthorized user. Given this, deciding what secure storage will look like in your home and vehicle is influenced by a variety of factors. So we have provided some resources here. If you scan these QR codes, you'll see, we'll also drop the links in the chat, but there's more information just about how to store firearms securely. And I think that's all from me. Oh yeah, there's our state of the policy brief will be released soon. It's nearly finished, and you'll be able to find that on our website, and we'll update the findings that I presented here regularly to continue to understand how the evolution of the implementation of this law is kind of changing over time. And I think with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Leslie Barnard.
Awesome, thanks so much. All right, so pivoting over to talk about ERPOs. As Erin mentioned, this law went into effect in the first of the year in 2020. The law is designed to remove access to firearms for people who pose a significant and immediate risk of harming themselves or others, and firearm access increases that risk. And these orders usually last about a year. Research has found that for every 10 to 15 ERPOs that are granted, one suicide death can be prevented. Additionally, ongoing studies are looking at if ERPOs can prevent mass shootings, homicides, and other firearm-involved injuries and deaths. Those who can file an ERPO, which is also known as a petitioner, include law enforcement officers, family or household members, and the list of folks who fall into that bucket are specific, and details about who can be included there can be found on the Colorado Judicial Branch's website. And then in 2023, additional petitioners were added to this list. Those include healthcare or mental health care providers who have provided care to the person at risk or their child within the last 6 months. K through 12 and higher education administrators and educators. Again, these folks must have directly interacted through a professional relationship with the person at risk or with their child within the last 6 months. And then finally, district attorneys. Next slide. In Colorado, like in other states, after a petition is filed, there's first a temporary or ex parte order. Here we're calling those TERPOs. There's a TERPO hearing. So a petition is filed with specific evidence in a civil court, and a judge reviews that petition and the evidence provided. If that judge finds probable cause, then an emergency or TERPO is granted. And then the respondents, which is the person who the ERPO is being filed against, firearms are relinquished, and they're not allowed to purchase any additional ones. This TERPO or emergency order lasts 2 weeks. And during that time frame, the respondent is served with the notice of a full order hearing. Here we're referring to those as the ERPOs. During that time frame, at the full hearing, both of the parties present their case, and the judge decides whether to issue the final ERPO, which restricts firearm access for 364 days, so that full year period. Once the ERPO expires at any stage, so that could be at the TERPO period, so if a TERPO is granted but the full order is denied, or if the full ERPO is granted and a year passes, the ERPO can be re-petitioned for, or more commonly, the firearms are then returned and the ability to purchase firearms again is restored. Here you can see our flowchart of the ERPO process. And I just wanted to note here that the TERPO and ERPO grants and denials don't equal the total number of petitions, because in some cases, petitions are dismissed by the court. Usually this is cases where an alternative outcome is pursued, such as the respondent going to substance use treatment, or the court records didn't include those outcomes in those specific cases. And I just want to address one common question that we get a lot, which is whether ERPOs are inappropriately used or falsely filed. In the 5 years of data that we have here, we found that less than 3% were determined to be inappropriately or falsely filed, and all of these petitions were denied. And we're aware of one case where a petitioner had charges actually brought against them from knowingly filing an ERPO inappropriately. The majority of cases that are filed are done so by law enforcement officers, with an additional significant proportion filed by family or household members. Of these, you can see that the law enforcement officers have seen a higher proportion of their filings being granted by judges compared to all other petitioner groups, which we are digging into, trying to figure out what's going on there. Of the new groups that I mentioned that were allowed to file in 2023, only 9 petitions have been filed across them. We also wanted to note that in the court records, an individual that filed might be listed as unknown because that information either was not provided on the form or it was redacted by the courts. We're also able to look at the reasons for filing in the court records. In the majority of records, although we're not always able to ascertain this due to some missing information, of those where we can get this information, you can see that the biggest reason why people have filed ERPOs over the 5 years of data that we have is due to threats towards others. But there is a significant group who have threatened others and themselves, and almost 1 in 4 threatens against themselves alone. Additionally, in the visual on the right, sorry. Thanks, Erin. On the visual on the right, provides reasons for filing by each year. And if you look at the darkest color, you can see that in recent years, there's been an increase in the use of ERPOs to address threats towards self, indicating a growing use of ERPOs as a tool in preventing self-harm. So to shift here, we wanted to provide some information from COFIPS on how we're aware, how aware Coloradans are that ERPOs exist in our state. And as you can see, the vast majority of Coloradan adults are aware that ERPOs do exist in Colorado. We also asked Coloradan adults about their perceptions of where they believe ERPOs are at least sometimes appropriate in various scenarios. And we broke this down by firearm owners and those who do not own firearms. Overall, in all groups, at least 85% of Coloradan adults, including those who own firearms and those who don't, believe that using an ERPO was at least sometimes appropriate in each of the scenarios that we asked about. While those who don't own firearms, which is, you can see that the top 2 scenarios had slightly higher beliefs where someone was experiencing a severe emotional crisis or had dementia or other cognitive impairments. And firearm owners demonstrated higher beliefs in scenarios, those in the bottom 3, where someone had threatened to physically hurt themselves, hurt someone else, or hurt a group of people. So in summary, ERPOs have the potential to improve public safety and reduce firearm-related harms while respecting the rights of responsible gun owners. However, most Coloradans, firearm owners or not, will never be involved in the ERPO process. Before using an ERPO, many people who are worried about the safety of someone who has access to firearms can first try to take action together to temporarily limit their access to firearms. Options include introducing the use of a secure storage device, adjusting current secure storage practices, or arranging temporary out-of-home storage, such as at a firearm retailer, for the duration of that crisis period. But if immediate action is needed and other options are not possible or effective, ERPOs can be part of the solution for safety. And resources can help in decide. These are some of the resources that can help in deciding what's best if you're concerned about someone's safety. Avery's dropping those in the chat for you all. And then finally, I wanted to also point out 2 other additional resources. Much of the data presented here is also included in the ERPO State of the Policy Brief that you can scan in the QR code on the left. Avery also just dropped it in the chat. We also have a What is an ERPO resource, and you can scan that QR code on the right. Again, Avery's providing those links. Thank you. And that's it for me. I will turn it back over to Erin.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Leslie. So I wanted to end the overview of laws that we have been looking at implementation around to let you all know that we are still looking at the law of lost or stolen firearms, which was passed in 2021 and came into effect that year. So the intent of this law is to prevent firearm trafficking, which trafficking is when firearms are moved from legal to essentially illegal streams of commerce. And the goal of that is so that we can prevent violent crime that involves those trafficked firearms. So to make sure that those aren't subsequently used in that case. And noting that the large majority of firearms used in violent crime were at one point illegal firearms. So this is why there's a strong focus on reporting lost or stolen firearms. So just some key pieces around this law is that there is a federal law that requires firearm dealers or federal firearm licensees to report lost or stolen guns, but only 15 states currently, which includes Colorado as of 2021, actually require firearm owners to report their lost or stolen firearms. So in Colorado, that individual, if they lose or have a firearm stolen, must report that firearm within 5 days of discovering that that is the case. And then the owner or member of the family and also noting that the owner or member of a family who resides with the owner can also report that, and it's considered kind of one record to law enforcement. Law enforcement then enters that information into a Colorado Bureau of Investigation database. And then if that law is violated, so you did not report and that firearm is subsequently discovered to have been used in a violent crime, first offense of violating that law is a civil infraction, and any subsequent offense is a criminal misdemeanor. So noting that we're going to provide more information soon, we're working on data collection to understand how many Coloradans have actually reported their firearms as being lost or stolen. But we wanted to note that only 2 individuals in that past 4-year period have actually been charged with not reporting that lost or stolen firearm. So a key piece here is that what we might be seeing is that the law is working because people are reporting their lost or stolen firearms, but only 2 individuals have subsequently been charged with not reporting it, and that firearm was used subsequently in a crime. We did also ask in the COFIP's 2025 survey if Colorado adults were aware that they're required to report that. And again here, 3 in 5 of those are noting that they are aware that they should do that, but then the rest of the folks in the sample really reported that they were either unaware that they needed that law existed or just didn't know if it existed at all. So more education would be needed on this reporting system as well. So given that is the conclusion of our overview. Again, Avery is dropping different resources in, but here is our website, our email, and our LinkedIn page. And if you want to use the QR code to sign up for our newsletter so that you will be able to see any more of these briefs as they come out, the safe storage or the lost or stolen firearms brief. Go ahead and stop sharing.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for your presentation. Again, thanks for being here. We have a few questions, one of which I've already responded to in the Q&A. For those who are still in the audience, please feel free to post those, and we will get to them as time allows. We also have a few that were pre-submitted, which we can go through as well. But I also wanted to start with a question, if that's okay. It was referring to something Dr. Barnard was talking about. You had mentioned that in 5 years of Colorado's extreme risk protection order law, and correct me if I was wrong on the data here, about 3% of the cases you reviewed were cases that were inappropriately filed. And importantly, in those cases, none of the extreme risk protection orders had been granted. That is, they never went on to actually impact the firearm access or ownership of the person who was petitioned against. This seems like an incredibly important outcome. I know that was included in a lot of these evaluations, in part because of the firearm community's concern about how these orders might be misused. So it's I think 3% is low, which is good, but it's really reassuring that none of them actually led to orders. But I'm also kind of wondering, what are the other potential negative outcomes that we're evaluating or we should be thinking about evaluating in terms of these procedures and how they work or don't work for people?
Yeah, great question. And the 3% was exactly what we found. So I think highlighting that, I think some would say, and I might say that 3% is so low that this can be seen as a function that ERPOs are being used appropriately, and that the system is working in a way that discourages folks from using this in a retaliatory or some kind of inappropriate way. I will say that definitely doesn't mean that there's no negative consequences to being subject to an inappropriately filed ERPO. Especially if it's denied at the turbo phase, the person might not ever know about it because the respondents aren't necessarily informed of the turbo component. And so there's probably even fewer that are at the full order hearing. However, going through a legal process that can involve law enforcement contact and court appearances and other things could potentially be stigmatizing and stressful. And so it's something that we are constantly evaluating. It's something we are really trying to make sure that we're tracking as much as we possibly can. And so we're really invested in making sure that the ERPO law is being implemented in the way that it was designed, and any negative consequences as a result of being a part of the ERPO process, we are fully tracking. Did that fully answer your question, Joe?
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. Thank you. Appreciate it. We have a question, Dr. McNellan. This came at the end of your presentation, so maybe I'll direct this towards you. From a non-Coloradoan here, I'll just note there's a fancy debate about whether we are Coloradans or Coloradoans. Is there an effort in Colorado to attempt to restrict the discretion owners of firearms have in determining appropriate storage in order to ensure that more effective forms of storage are employed? I think what is also, to put that a different way, I think, do the laws specify the ways in which firearms need to be stored in Colorado, aside from stipulating that children and unauthorized users can't access them?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So the laws that I presented on today definitely are allowing discretion on how to store the firearm. And this encourages autonomy in terms of just ensuring that that firearm is not accessible by a child or unauthorized user, but there's discretion in terms of how that storage happens. And then I think that some of the links that were shared in the chat during our talk just are more about focused on kind of ensuring knowledge about different options for firearm owners so that they can make an informed decision about how to store that firearm. I'm not aware of any other laws that would restrict the decision making there. And I say Coloradan personally.
Thank you. Okay, and Dr. Kelly, maybe I'll direct this one towards you. Does your program do any outreach with gun shops to provide education or these flyers on firearm storage? And I guess you could answer that with respect to the topics that we focus on today, or if you wanted to expand upon any of your other efforts with firearm retailers, you're welcome to do that as well.
Yeah, thank you. I love this question because we have several, I think, partnerships in place with firearm retailers throughout the state of Colorado and nationally at this point in time. The Office of Suicide Prevention at Colorado has a program called the Gun Shop Project, which is really around educating retailers about their potential role in providing education to customers about the link between firearm access and increase in suicide, simply because they have access to a very lethal weapon at a very hard time in their lives when they're undergoing a crisis. And just the role and the importance of secure storage and potentially preventing that, including temporary and voluntary out-of-home storage. So there are already groups that are providing education in those ways around that. We've also, FIPI has started a program called Pause to Protect that helps businesses, firearm retailers, ranges specifically, have access to resources that would allow them to provide even broader services around distributing secure storage devices to households, as well as providing that on-site storage within their retail location if they are able to. But also the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, I think, does a lot of work in educating different firearm retailers on different types of laws that they need to be aware of. So I think a next step is potentially to try to aggregate, and I know there's several state agencies meeting around this, information to these firearm retailers to try to provide some of this information around these requirements. But many are aware. I know in firearm safety training, so instructors often talk about the need to securely store firearms if children are in the home. So I think a lot of people within the community doing training instruction are already providing a significant amount of this detail. It's whether or not it's standardized from all these different groups that I think is the question. But that's absolutely what these data can be used to improve upon, really making sure there's coordinated effort to know what we can be providing education on to those who are purchasing firearms.
All right, thank you for that. Dr. Barnard, I'm going to come back to you. We have a number of open questions pertaining to extreme risk protection orders, several of which are, I'll just say broadly around the topic of the petitioners themselves. And I think you've had a chance to skim them. I was wondering if you could address some of these questions about petitioners and protection orders.
Yeah, sure. I'm going to try to make sure I tackle all these, so I might take a couple pauses to scroll. But just broadly, as I mentioned, there's a new petitioner group that was added to the Colorado statute in 2023, which included both educators, which we have a question on, and then also healthcare providers. So to answer the first one, the question is, do we know how educators were made aware that they could file an ERPO and how to do it? As far as I know, the passage of the law didn't come with any dissemination efforts. So I'm not aware of any like uniform dissemination to make educators aware that this is a resource for them. That doesn't mean that groups aren't doing it, but related to the statute in particular, I don't believe so. However, as I showed, there are a couple of petitions that were filed by educators. And so we know that they are in theory capable of figuring out how to petition for them. But it's potentially impacted by sort of resources that they have, et cetera. It's something that we're definitely interested in continuing to evaluate and understanding how educators view this tool and when they would potentially use it and what would be helpful for them to maintain access to it. The other question was related to healthcare providers. So the question was, Colorado recently expanded its ERPO law to include healthcare providers, for those who can petition. Is FIPI or anyone researching whether or not this has repelled firearm owners from care based on fear of having ERPOs filed? So related to this question, we haven't seen a ton of ERPOs filed by particularly, I think, mental health care providers is what would potentially be the concern here. There has been research in other states that looks at the use of these by behavioral health specialists and other mental health care providers and whether or not this is sort of within their role and how they view them. I think it's incredibly complicated, the relationship between ERPOs and the legal court system and assessing people's firearm access and maintaining trust in a therapeutic relationship. So the answer is there's some research around this, but much more is needed to fully assess, both from the firearm owner's perspective, what would sort of disincentivize someone from seeking help if there's potential for legal action, but then also from the healthcare provider side, how do they maintain confidentiality with the patients that they're serving and trust to make sure that they feel comfortable coming back and returning and seeking care. So it's a really great question. I don't think it's fully settled in the literature. I think that answers the questions related to these new petitioner groups, but happy to answer more.
I might just mention too, because I think a few folks are chatting us who've been involved in these efforts as well, but the Colorado Office of Gun Violence Prevention also just released training curricula for health and behavioral health care professionals on ERPOs, so that is accessible through their website. And then the AG's office will also be the Attorney General's office will also be rolling out an online training for K through 12 and higher education educators this fall, I believe.
Thank you. I'll just sort of maybe also add to that. I think this question is broader than just the ERPO related discussion. We have some preliminary data which we'll present soon showing, concerns about even showing up to the doctor for routine health concerns and what that can and cannot do for somebody's Second Amendment rights. Largely, this is all sort of misconception, but those misconceptions are highly prevalent, is likely, I would say, impacting clinical care. The challenges are how do you actually conduct an evaluation to see that impact, which can be a really challenging thing. Dr. Kelly, I'm going to ask you, how can these data be used to improve implementation? So who needs to see and engage in this data to improve implementation and therefore the effectiveness in preventing the injuries?
Yeah, this is a great question. I think I gave an example of, I would say, I hope folks that were here today are some of those people who can take some of these and say, oh, I think this is what applies to something that I'm doing. So a great example is this kind of, I think, opportunity to work with firearm retailers to provide kind of standard education around some of these laws and just making people aware of them. And then the flexibility within those laws as well. Like a great one we've discussed is that secure storage is to discretion. You just have to meet basic requirements around that. So trying to make sure that it's flexible for those different houses. I also think that that lots of groups that are working with individuals around providing education is really helpful as well. So I think a good example is for the lost or stolen firearms. If people aren't aware that they need to report, this is just something that is kind of a basic piece. So knowing exactly where they need to do that, it was hard for me even to kind of find where you actually are supposed to report that. And I think you just call up your local law enforcement agency, but making some kind of information more available around that, I think would be really helpful for those, or what to expect if you're going to do that, those different things as well. I think there's always the case of policy is passed by legislators. And so legislators understanding, of course, what's happened as a result of those bills, and if there's any opportunities to improve any legislation or administration funding for those efforts to make sure that that can be put into practice in a better way is always great. So understanding any kind of improvements that could be made from there as well. And I don't know if Leslie or Claire have any other thoughts for that too.
Okay, Dr. McNellan, I wanted to come back to you. I'm curious in what sort of the temporal trend is and sort of the application of the laws that you described are. So how are we seeing them change year over year? And then is there any way you can link the actual application of those laws to injury rates in any way at like a geographic level?
Yeah, thanks. Those are good questions. And in terms of temporal trends, I think that we saw that there was a peak in 2022, actually the highest number of cases filed about safe storage. But in general, there's not really a strong trend that we're seeing and temporally. And so something that we're going to continue to monitor. It only went into effect in 2021, so limited time there to look at it. And same goes for the vehicles law, of course, because it was only went into effect today. Or I mean this year. And I think in terms of, what was the second part of your question? Was it, yeah, can you repeat the second part?
It was time trends and also like, the challenges or opportunities in linking these to actual geographic data to look at, whether it has impact on some sort of intermediate outcomes like secure storage or injury outcomes. Right.
Yeah. And obviously that's a really important question. But it's difficult to look at right now with such small numbers of cases filed. In terms of geographically, we are seeing that I think it was only about a third of counties had filed cases related to the safe storage law. So it's not evenly distributed across the state or anything. We see a higher number of cases filed in like the Front Range area, Larimer, Weld, Douglas. But in terms of tying these geographic trends to any sort of impact on actual use of firearms or gun violence, that's an outstanding question, something we'll continue to monitor. Very difficult to do with low numbers of cases filed.
And linking to geography is always difficult in terms of evaluation, I think.
Yeah, 100%.
Dr. Barnett, I want to come back to you a couple of questions. I think a really, really important topic for extreme risk protection orders. I mean, one, we know limiting access to lethal methods in these extraordinary situations. If you've heard some of the vignettes about the ways in which they're used, it's really important. But obviously, there's folks who probably need other types of support. And so there are a couple questions in here about what sort of either court mandated or other mental health evaluations and treatments that we know individuals get after they are involved in this process, and to what extent we know any of that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I noticed there are a couple other questions related to ERPO data. And I just wanted to note quickly that as Erin talked about our process of how we get information on all of these records, everything that we are everything we're ascertaining is directly from court records. And so things like mental health evaluations may occur outside of like the regular court process. And so they may not be included in those court documents. So we're a little bit limited to like the legal information that we can ascertain. We don't have access to folks' medical records, for example, and they may be getting mental health evaluations or accessing care in other ways that we just don't know about because it's not included in those court records. So I just wanted to note that important limitation that we have related to these data. Related to mental health evaluations, I actually was just pulling up something I just wrote. So in this same time frame, so over the past 5 years, 2020 to 2024, 4% of respondents were ordered to have a mental health evaluation as a part of their final order hearing. There are other resources that are brought into the ERPO process, including substance use treatment, anger management treatment, other therapeutic related things that address underlying risk factors for firearm violence. And we try to collect all of that information, but again, we are just limited by what we have. Occasionally we'll get, like I mentioned, that there are some cases that are dismissed and it's sort of because of other things that are going on. Some of them will mention, oh, this person did chemical dependency treatment or something, and so we dismissed the ERPO because that was the underlying risk that we are worried about. Other cases, we just see they're dismissed and we don't have the actual information. So it could be more than that, but right now our data is showing us about 4%, which is low. And I think that ERPOs are potentially an opportunity to intervene in high-risk individuals and address these underlying risk factors. So I'm interested to see as ERPOs sort of evolve as a policy in Colorado. They're still relatively new, but as they evolve, are these other connections going to be made within the ERPO process that will, like I said, address these underlying resources and try to get help for folks. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. There's a question here, which I think I'm going to direct to you, Dr. Kelly. It's about pregnancy-associated deaths. The number one cause of death among pregnant women in the U.S. is actually homicide. And the question is about implementing safe storage and ERPO laws in the transition to parenthood. And I'll just say, I am kind of interested in the answer to that, but also more broadly about other efforts to work on this topic and that transition to parenthood that you're involved with.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's an important topic to bring up and for us to be thinking about in this context. It does first let me take one step back here, which is that I know that we are discussing policy as a key for preventing firearm-related harms today, since we're talking about the implementation and what we found from those. But I also think that a really important piece that we want to reemphasize in all this is that there is incredible community-based work occurring as well, education efforts too, many of which we've talked about as resources in here that I think are an important part of this. So I'll answer this question kind of in context of, I think, of a lot of community-based work that's addressing this, because at the end of the day, going in and saying the law requires this may not be the best way to kind of communicate these pieces, right? Versus a motivation for making sure that firearms are securely stored in a household where a child is going to enter the world, for example, is a different kind of, I think, way of approaching this. So one thing I'll mention here is that Dr. Simonetti and I and others in the Injury and Violence Prevention Center and the Firearm Injury Prevention Initiative are expanding a program that's been piloted in 2 different Colorado counties that was known as Safe Homes Colorado, but is now going to become Safe Starts at Home. And that effort is really focused on providing kind of education to those who are entering homes as home visiting services, which would involve a lot of this kind of transition to parenthood piece that you're asking about specifically, and really helping them talk about how to talk about storing firearms securely, as well as any substances or medicine in the home as part of that conversation, since those are all really sensitive conversations we have to engage in at that critical kind of transition in adults' lives. And then also providing them with safety kits where they actually receive locking devices for the firearms or any other substances or medicine as well. And I think this is a key piece in trying to make sure that we're having conversations with people who might be at higher risk or might be or just that are kind of engaging in that transition period in life as well. So we are trying to think about those critical moments where we might be able to get access to people to have those harder conversations, whether it's about a law required or just the importance of doing this because life is changing for them as part of that. So lots of efforts, I think, underway to try to find those critical kind of life moments. And a great example of that is that transition to parenthood or just a new child in the home at that.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple additional questions before we sort of wrap up at the top of the hour. There's a fascinating question. I'll just leave this to the three of you to decide who to answer it. Is there any evidence that individuals under an extreme risk protection order still manage to secure a firearm? So I'll sort of loosen that sort of definition of secure a firearm. So what are the firearm-related outcomes after somebody is the subject of a TERPO or an ERPO?
Yeah, I'll address like directly the question first, and then I can go a little bit more broadly. But we don't have data that suggests or doesn't suggest this, which is to say we have not seen it in our court records, but that doesn't mean that someone hasn't managed to get access to a firearm while they were under an ERPO or a TERPO, say. I was actually just looking this morning, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation collects data on what reasons for denial of sales, and there's a broad category for protection orders, which can include ERPOs, but also includes like domestic violence protection orders or other types of protection orders. And it does look like there are a number in there that have been denied because an existing protection order was in place. That's sort of the opposite of like when this is working, when someone's trying to get access to a firearm and they end up not being able to because of this law. But I don't have evidence that anyone has gotten access, but again, that doesn't disprove that it exists. I'll pause there and let others answer. Okay, and then more broadly, Joe, can you clarify that just a little bit, just like what happens under TERPO and ERPO?
I'm just wondering what the firearm-related outcomes are. So the procedure, when it is supported by a judge, is supposed to lead to restriction of access to firearms. What do we know about restriction of access to firearms as a result of these?
Yeah, so these data are a little bit complicated. There aren't official processes or paperwork that's filed by law enforcement or the courts to show that relinquishment of firearms actually happens. And so we're collecting it where it's available, and we believe it is happening when we have that information. But like I said, it's a little bit more complicated because some of the cases where ERPOs are granted, we actually don't know what ends up happening to those firearms. And again, some people don't have access to firearms. They're just preventing the purchase of additional firearms. So it can get a little bit complicated when you get into the weeds of those things. But of the cases that we know where firearm relinquishment is occurring, we've also seen on the other end that once the ERPO expires, that firearm return is also happening. So if there is sort of this like chain of evidence that's included in the court records, we can see the firearms are removed and then also returned at the end of the ERPO period.
Okay, thank you. So I have one more question for Dr. McNellan. There's a number we're not going to be able to get to just because of time. Anyone who has an open question that we haven't gotten to, I'm sorry about that, but you can email us with the information that is affiliated with the webinar, and we will do our best to answer your questions. Dr. Millen, I'm so interested in like policies sort of at the state level and how many of them exist and how many of them I just have no idea about or have, misconceptions about. And I'm just trying to think of like once a policy is passed at the state or the local or the federal level, like all the things that have to happen in order for it to come into my household, make me aware of it, and for me to actually change a behavior if it's relevant to me. Is there any work going on that you know about to sort of figure out what that chain of events is pertaining to these laws and policies? And do you have any sense of like what are the major things that are probably impacting behaviors on the tail end of this?
Yeah, that's a really excellent question, because of course our motivation behind studying these laws is to understand, how are they being implemented in order to understand are they effective and in achieving the goals. And so uh, it's really important to kind of understand the chain of how laws actually function. Erin, you might have more thoughts on this too, so I'll open it up to you after I talk. But um, I think that in general, our starting place so far has been just trying to understand whether Coloradans know about the laws. And since we have shown that there is a gap in knowledge generally across both firearm owners and non-firearm owners, sort of next steps to improve education and knowledge about, not only how to store firearms securely, but why. And that some of the links that we've shared in the chat, I feel like I'm not fully answering that. Erin, I don't know if you have other thoughts.
I think that's a great response. I mean, if you don't have awareness, the rest of the implementation doesn't really matter, nor can you study it, right? And
Right.
that's kind of how I led the question, which is like, how many laws do we have in Colorado, and how many of them could I actually tell you about? And so I think how you translate laws and policies into something that's person-centered and digestible and, prevalent in terms of messaging, I think is a really challenging thing. And it competes with all the other things that we're trying to do.
Yeah,
But
and I think it's with the child access prevention laws. I know that the current body of literature that supports um, the effectiveness of CAP laws in reducing risk for children, it isn't super clear on how those CAP laws are currently working. So
yeah,
that's definitely a question that we're hoping to start to chip away at a little bit as we continue to research these laws.
yeah, that's a great point. Okay, so we're at the top of the hour. With that, I want to thank everyone for presenting here today and for attending and for all of the questions. I really like this discussion. If we didn't get to your question or you have follow-ups or you want to engage with us on a different topic, I want to thank Avery Moji for adding into the chat our website and contact information. You can also use that to sign up for our recurring webinar series. With that, I'm going to end our discussion today. Again, thank you and have a great day.